The sun hovered low above the horizon, casting an orange glow across the empty highway as Daniel drove westward through the desert. The hum of the engine was the only company he had. It was the kind of silence that didn't ask for permission. It just settled deep into your chest. He hadn't spoken to anyone in hours, not since he left the last gas station 2 states ago. Somewhere between the familiar and the unknown, his mind replayed an endless loop of regrets. Sometimes the loneliest place isn't your home, it's your own mind, he thought, watching the road stretch out endlessly ahead. 6 years of marriage had passed like pages of a book he couldn't remember reading. It hadn't always been like this. He could still recall the first few years, late-night ice cream runs, spontaneous laughter, falling asleep mid-conversation. But somewhere along the way, things had dimmed. His wife, Claire, had changed. Or maybe they both had. Conversations turned into updates. Physical touch turned into polite distance. Love became routine. When she said, "Maybe we need space," she didn't mean forever. But he heard the edge in her voice, the exhaustion. So he left, half hoping to return with a clearer head, half afraid he wouldn't want to return at all. He didn't blame her. In fact, he didn't blame anyone. There wasn't a villain in this story, just two people who forgot how to be close. A neon sign blinked just ahead. Diner open 24 HRS. His stomach reminded him he hadn't eaten since morning, so he pulled off the highway and parked under the awning. Rain started to fall, light at first, then steadier, tapping against the roof of the car. Inside the diner, the smell of coffee and fried food offered a strange comfort. He sat near the window, watching water streak down the glass. That's when he saw her. Standing just outside under the awning, arms wrapped around a worn-out backpack, hair pulled into a loose knot. She didn't look distressed, just quiet, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the small crowd before landing on him. With casual boldness, she walked over and tilted her head slightly. "You heading west?" Daniel blinked, a little startled. "Yeah, I am." "Any room for one more?" He hesitated. In any other context, he might have said no. But something about her tone wasn't desperate. It was peaceful. Like she wasn't asking for much, just a ride and maybe a few hours of not being alone. "Sure," he said after a beat. "Yeah, hop in." They walked out together, the rain now just a mist. She climbed into the passenger seat without another word. He glanced at her before starting the engine again. The road welcomed them with its quiet rhythm. For the first hour, they said nothing. She looked out the window, watching the raindrops chase each other across the glass. He kept his eyes on the road, unsure whether to speak or keep the silence intact. Finally, she broke it. "I'm Lena," she said softly. "Daniel." "Where you headed?" "Not sure. Was thinking Colorado. Maybe beyond." She nodded. "I'm not running. Just drifting." He looked at her briefly. She wasn't what he expected. No nervous energy, no explanation. Just presence. "You?" He took a breath, trying to figure out if going home still makes sense. She didn't pry, just nodded again, like she understood. Maybe she did. They stopped, for gas an hour later. She stretched, hands above her head, then leaned against the car with her eyes closed, breathing in the cool air. Daniel watched her from the corner of his eye. There was something grounded about her, like she belonged nowhere and everywhere, all at once. As the miles passed, so did the awkwardness. Their conversation found a rhythm, light at first, like skipping stones. He told her about a motel clerk who once offered him a desert discount for being the only guest. She laughed, and the sound filled the car like music. She shared a story about getting stranded in Kansas because she thought she could outrun a tornado. Neither of them asked the big questions. But in the pauses, they both knew there were deeper stories hiding beneath the surface. When night fell again, Daniel caught himself glancing over at her more than once. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, in a quiet, unfussy way, but because she was there, present, listening, real. the kind of presence he hadn't felt in years. He drove slower than usual, not because of the road, but because of the company. Later, when they pulled into a small town and she closed her eyes, briefly, he watched her for a moment longer than he should have. She caught him. "I'm not trying to complicate your life," she said softly. "I know," he replied. "You just stepped into it." He lay awake that night in a roadside motel, staring at the ceiling as the ceiling fans spun in lazy circles. She was in the other bed, back turned, asleep or pretending to be. He whispered into the quiet, not sure if she'd hear. "I didn't pick you up because I was lonely. Or maybe I did. But sometimes fate puts someone in your passenger seat to show you what you've been missing." The sun dipped behind the mountains, bleeding orange and gold across the windshield, as they drove in that quiet, magical hour just before dark. The silence between them had softened into something easy. She cracked a joke about the diner they'd left behind. "I think that coffee was brewed during the Civil War." He laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. "I think the eggs were made out of styrofoam." They kept going like that, mocking cheesy roadside signs, trying to one-up each other with terrible gas station stories. It was effortless. Their banter had a rhythm, unpracticed but perfect. He caught himself glancing at her again, not for what she looked like, but because of how she made him feel. Lighter. Seen. Present. She leaned back against the window and exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for months. "I used to think that relationships were about filling a hole," she said quietly. "But the guy I was with, he wanted to fill every part of me with himself. There wasn't room for me anymore." She paused. "So I left. No plan. Just space." Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He wasn't expecting honesty to spill so suddenly, but it made him feel like he owed her something in return. "I'm married," he said, eyes still on the road. Her face didn't change, but he felt the shift in the air. "She told me she needed space too. I don't think either of us expected me to actually take it." He breathed out a small laugh. "I didn't ask her if that meant forever. I just packed and went. I figured if I left, maybe I'd miss her. But mostly, I just missed the version of us that doesn't exist anymore." Lena didn't say anything right away. She looked out the window, then back at him. "Sometimes leaving is the only way to feel like yourself again." By the time night wrapped around them like a blanket, they rolled into a town barely marked. On the map, one gas station, one blinking traffic light, one motel. Daniel stepped inside while Lena stayed by the car, arms folded, waiting. He returned with a tight expression. "Only one room left." She raised an eyebrow. "You're not sleeping in the car." "It's fine, I can—" She cut him off. "2 beds?" He nodded. "Then let's not make it a big deal." The room was dim and smelled faintly of old wood and fabric softener. They each took a bed without ceremony. She tossed her bag on a chair, pulled off her jacket and collapsed onto the mattress. He sat at the edge of his own bed, staring at nothing. Eventually, she spoke into the dark. "You think she's still waiting for you?" "I don't know," he replied, voice low. "I don't even know if I want her to be." Lena rolled onto her side, facing him across the small gap of floor between them. The blinds filtered moonlight into silver lines across her face. "Do you still love her?" Daniel looked at the ceiling for a long time. "I think I love the idea of her. Of us. But the real version? I don't know anymore." Silence folded over them like a blanket. But it wasn't empty. It was full of everything unsaid, everything felt, everything they were holding back. Lena eventually turned away and drifted into sleep, her breath steady, calm. Daniel lay awake, heart ticking like a clock he couldn't silence. He stared at the ceiling again, only this time the thoughts were louder. He hadn't kissed her, hadn't touched her. But in his heart, he knew something had changed. Was that enough to be betrayal? Was infidelity only about the body? Or did the heart get a say? He thought about the way she looked at him when he admitted the truth. Not with judgment, but understanding. He thought about the way his wife hadn't looked at him at all in the weeks before he left. The idea of cheating used to feel like a line in the sand, clear, sharp. But now it felt more like fog, swallowing him slowly. He rolled onto his side, looking toward her shape in the dark. I haven't crossed the line, he thought. But I'm standing at the edge, wondering what it would feel like if I did. Morning came slowly. Light spilled into the room in pale gold. Daniel woke to the smell of coffee and the soft clink of ceramic. Lena stood by the sink, holding 2 paper cups. She handed him one with a sleepy smile. Their fingers touched. Just a brush. But neither of them pulled away immediately. We should go, he said after a long second. But neither of them moved. Wanted to feel alive again. Not just wanted, seen, understood. She nods, biting her lip. We both borrowed something that doesn't belong to us, didn't we? They sit side by side on a bench overlooking the valley below. The silence between them isn't awkward. It's heavy, real, honest. I told myself nothing happened, he says slowly. But it did. In here. He taps his chest. And I don't know what that makes me. A man who's human, she says. Who made space for something that felt like hope. That's not a crime, but it is a choice. He looks at her then. Really looks. Her eyes are damp but steady. She doesn't ask him to choose her. She doesn't even ask him to stay. She's just there, offering truth, not promise. I could keep driving, he murmurs. We could keep pretending the road is all that matters. Lena smiles sadly. But it's not, is it? We both have ghosts waiting for us. Yours has a name. Mine's a version of myself I'm still trying to meet. He reaches for her hand, and she lets him hold it. Just for a moment. Then she pulls away gently. There's a part of me that wanted you to cross that line, she says. And there's a part of me that's glad you didn't. He nods, throat thick. Me too. They walk back to the car slowly, the moment already slipping behind them like miles of highway. When they reach it, he hesitates by the door. She doesn't ask the question again. She just watches. He starts the engine. The GPS chirps. 2 routes available. One to the west, into open land. No plan, no answers. The other, toward the life he left suspended. He stares at the screen. Then, without a word, he turns the car, east. Lena doesn't look surprised. She places her hand gently on the dashboard. Thank you for the detour. He glances at her. For a moment, it felt like a destination. She smiles. That's enough. He drops her off at a bus station in the next town. They don't hug. They don't kiss. But she lingers by the door. Take care of your heart, she says. You too. And then she's gone, walking toward the station without looking back. He watches her disappear, the silence of the car suddenly louder than ever. Then he shifts into gear and drives off, the road stretching ahead like a promise he intends to keep. Not because he has all the answers, but because for the first time in a long while he's ready to find them, alone.